Does Christ's resurrection give us evidence for God's existence? That's the question that we're exploring here today on this episode of 5 Good Reasons Why God Exists. There's a passage of scripture in the book of 1 Corinthians 15 says this. Paul writes, "And if Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith. More than that, we are found to be false witnesses about God. For we have testified about God that he has raised Christ from the dead." That God has raised Christ from the dead. And so I'm Cary Decker, your host for this episode of 5 Good Reasons Why God Exists. And we're looking at the whole question of if Christ's resurrection gives us good reasons to believe that God does exist. This is Kaboom. We'll be right back. My guest with me today is Dr. Gary Habermas. You don't know the brain damage that we went through to make this broadcast work. We've been working an hour and a half behind scenes trying to work out all the technical details. And so I appreciate you so much, Dr. Habermas, your patience.
Oh, I'm just glad to get going. You know, when you work so hard, you want something to work.
Yeah, really. And so you are the distinguished research professor of apologetics and philosophy at Liberty University. And so that sounds like an important title.
Well, it's a research title. I actually have distinguished in research are 2 different titles. So
okay.
They both delineate that I don't have an office and I sit at home and do a lot of writing.
That's great. So, and I know you've done an awful lot of writing on the question of Christ's resurrection, and we want to jump into that in just a little bit. But before we do, I would just like for you to give me the Cliff Notes version of your journey into faith.
Sure. Well, I was raised in a Christian home, and if you can be born into something, my grandparents and parents were Methodist, and then we moved, and there were no churches around us, so I got involved with the German Baptist Church, and everything was going along fine, and the closest person in my life died. And that left me with a quandary of problems about, is there an afterlife? Is there any reason to believe? And I started going through a bunch of doubts. Mm-hmm. And when you do that, people think, well, all I got to do is read the Bible, or I got to do is hear this preacher.
Yeah.
And if they're a little more sophisticated, they'll say, try this evidence, try that evidence. But I've tried all these evidences, and no matter how much I tried them, I didn't think they were very good. I didn't think they were very strong arguments. So make a real long search in a few years, it occurred to me that and this was it just hit me between the eyes one day when I was studying, that if Jesus was raised from the dead, that would be the best indication that Christianity is true. But then I thought, well, okay, I can see the path, but I don't know if there's any way to get on the path or to stay on the path or whatever. So that started me on about a 10-year journey, a very intense journey on doubts, and then off and on for 10 more years. So I spent a long time, up to 20 years, doubting my faith. And a lot of people say that, and they mean, oh, I was a kid, or I was an unbeliever. How old were you? 13. Okay, well, even after I finished my PhD, I told my mother one day, she called to see how my doubts were going, and I told her that I thought there was a fair chance I was a few months away from becoming a Buddhist. So I'll always remember that phone call. My mom doesn't remember it. My mom says, "Nah, I knew you were going to be okay," but it didn't bother her very much. But I'll tell you what,
Yeah.
at the minute, I was probably in the throes at that point of the greatest of all those years of doubt were probably at that time.
Wow, wow, wow. I think that this whole thing of doubt oftentimes drives us deeper into figuring out the foundations for our faith. You know, I know my
Yeah,
life has
yeah,
been plagued by doubts.
yeah, yeah. Well, I have had, I quit counting at about 750. I've had 750 conversations with doubters because this is going back to the 70s.
Yeah.
And when people found out that I was going through things and that I apparently got straightened out, or so they thought, well, maybe they could see what I was doing so they could get straightened out. So I
Yeah.
had, way before email, I was getting phone calls and I was teaching school and students came in to see me. And a lot of people are in turmoil. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, very, very, very common. And you learn different paths and different species of doubt and different problems. And for me, the biggest secret was making sense of the resurrection.
Yeah. 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 I love that passage in the Gospels where the man brings his epileptic son to Jesus, and
Yeah.
he says, "Lord, I believe. Help me to overcome my unbelief." And boy, that's been my life verse. So,
Well, you know what? I understand now. But by God's goodness,
yeah.
after 20 years, like I said, about half straight and about half intermittent, I went through doubts for that long,
Yeah.
and I didn't think I would ever get past it. I thought this is my personality. This is the way I think. It's who I am. My mom, when I was still at home, way back in the old days, she would just come talk to me at night. She would say, "Why can't you try an experiment with me?" I said, "Okay, what should I do?"
Yeah.
Well, just every time you have a doubt, say, I believe it's true, and after a week or so, you won't have any more doubts. And I thought, that's not how my personality works. I didn't think I would get over it. And then
Yeah.
lo and behold, in 1995, my wife died of stomach cancer.
Wow.
And I had 4 kids at home. The youngest was only 9.
Wow.
And I thought, I had been kind of doubt free for a while, and I thought, great, my doubts are probably going to come back again. I mean, this is a disaster. This is the worst thing that could happen to me.
Yeah.
My doubts went back for sure, and they never came back.
Wow. Wow.
So I'm not saying I never have questions. I'm just saying it's a long time since I've been bothered by a question. So
Yeah. Yeah.
just keep walking down the path and hope you're going in the right direction. That's what I was doing anyway.
There you go.
And I emerged from the woods one day.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Hey, when we're talking about the resurrection, and when Christians use that term, what exactly do they mean by this idea of Christ rising from the dead?
Well, let me back up from the chief Jewish sense. There are as many views in Judaism in the different groups. The Sadducees didn't believe in it. The Pharisees believed in bodily resurrection. It's really hard to tell with the Dead Sea community that gave us the Dead Sea Scrolls. Really hard to know what they believed. There were a lot of views. But the predominant Jewish view is that what happened to the body. It's a body that's raised.
Yeah.
And Paul, for example, when he talks about resurrection of the dead, intriguingly, it's always in the plural. It's always in the plural. And Paul's talking about the Jewish view was being raised corporately. So to be raised corporately,
Yeah.
bodily,
Yeah.
to a new heaven and a new earth. And, a new heaven and a new earth, you're not helping people much if they're a disembodied spirit, if they're
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
glorified spirit. So that's a view that there's an earth that corresponds to a resurrection body. It's a real earth, a real paradise, a real body, and we're kind of working, as I tell my grad students, we're working our way down the yellow brick road to the Emerald City. I mean, that's Pilgrim's Progress, that's Christian hope. and we're working there. But the end of days is with the redeemed on a new heaven, new earth. That's a Jewish view.
Yeah.
Is resurrected body. In fact, the word means anastasis. The Greek word means to stand again. It basically means that what went down is what's coming out. The body that went down, it's changed. It's changed for sure, as Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15. There are changes, but it's still a body. In Philippians chapter 3, he says, God has changed our vile soma, body, to be like his glorious soma, body. It'd be very easy for Paul to have said, he'll change our vile body to be like his glorious pneuma, spirit.
Yeah.
But he says, change our vile body to be like his glorious body.
Yeah. And so
that's the Christian hope.
Yeah. And so when we're talking about a resurrection, we're not talking about like what happened to Lazarus. Let's just assume that really happened, okay? But we're not talking about what happened to Lazarus when he came out of the tomb and there was a revivification. So what's the difference between resurrection and a coming back to life, or even some of like these near-death experiences that people have?
Sure. Well, the word for Lazarus, oftentimes commentators or even scholars will say Lazarus was resuscitated, Jesus was raised.
Yeah.
Now, Lazarus was truly, that's still not a good distinction, though, because that's like saying Lazarus wasn't truly dead. Well, that's not true. And if he wasn't truly raised, well, that's not true. But what we mean is he wasn't raised forever. He wasn't raised for eternity. He had to die again. And we have Elisha and Elijah, and we have the disciples raising people from the dead. Presumably, everyone's going to die again except Jesus. So Jesus is Paul calls him the first fruits of those who sleep. He's the first one to be resurrected. Even though Elisha and Elijah raised people from the dead, and even though Jesus raised people from the dead, it was not to be compared to the first fruits of the resurrection, because Jesus was raised, as the New Testament says over and over again, never to die again. For example, in Hebrews, the Old Testament saints had to keep offering sacrifices, but Jesus died once, never having to die again. So the New Testament hope is that living forever body. It's a resurrection to eternal life.
Yeah. So if I understand it correctly, then that this resurrected body is incorruptible. It's not subject to any decay.
That's correct. And Paul uses those 4 words in 1 Corinthians 15, where he says that. It's not this, it's not this, it's not this, but it's this, 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 this. He contrasts the old body with the new one, and tells us that we're going to be raised in a new way.
So this is, truly, if this happened, this is the greatest event in human history that not only tells us a lot about the identity of Jesus, but also the reality and existence of God. So correct. I guess the big question is that, did it happen?
Yes. And when I was going through my doubts, for me, I mean, it wasn't the end, but it was getting close to the end.
Yeah.
When I did my PhD dissertation at a secular school, and I had a committee. It's a larger committee than most. When we're on doctoral committees here, there's generally 3 people. Yeah. I had 6 people on my committee, and as nearly as I can tell, I didn't believe you should go around. Today, people are way more bold. But I never asked my professors, do you believe in the resurrection or not? But as nearly as I can tell, 3 of my professors believed it and 3 of them did not.
Huh.
And one of my professors was a Jewish historian, and he did not believe in it. So they were very kind in the sense that they basically said to me, we're liberal, but we're good liberals. And I'm thinking, what's good liberals? And they said, well, a good liberal is somebody who does research and realizes I may not come to your view and you may not come to my view. But if you can make your case and if you can evidence the resurrection, because that was the topic that was already established.
Yeah.
If you can make your case, we don't have to agree with you. And you're going to get your degree if you do it the right way, not if you come up with our answer.
Yeah.
So just have at it and do it. And as we were walking out of the meeting, the head of my, I had two heads, but the head of my committee said to me, he was one of the guys I would have said was not a believer, but like I said, I never asked him.
Yeah.
He said, just a caution. And I said, what's that? He said, don't tell us the resurrection happened because the New Testament said it happened. You're going to have to think of some reasons. Well, I misunderstood him. Like almost all my graduate, I teach only at the PhD level, and these folks are sharp, but they almost always make this bad mistake. And when they hear, don't tell me the resurrection happened because the New Testament said it happened, they think what you're saying is you can't use the New Testament.
Yeah.
And that is very far from what he meant. If you talk up to Bart Ehrman, for example, the best known, he's an atheist New Testament scholar at University of North Carolina, and he's the best known skeptic in North America.
Yeah.
And yet, if you were to say to him, oh, I can't use the Bible, right? I can't use the New Testament. He'd say that's a joke. And his books are filled with more New Testament verses than most believers would do.
Yeah.
But here's the way. If I could use a silly illustration, I don't even know if this is true biologically, but I've heard, the idea is going to help, even if it's not true. I've heard that spiders run across spider nests, and they don't get, webs, and they don't get caught because they know which strands to step on and which ones are sticky and which ones aren't going to stop them.
Huh.
Well, Bart Ehrman knows what verses to use and which verses not to use. Let's just say it from a skeptic's viewpoint. They don't use verses that they think are silly or unevidenced or just somebody giving their opinion. They're only going to use verses which are well attested.
Yeah.
And I found that out in my research, and they didn't care if I used verses. The guys on my committee, they were fine with me using verses, but I had to use verses that passed critical muster, if that makes sense. So I was off. Sure. When I learned that, use accredited verses, I thought, that's good. I will learn the rules for which verses I can use and which ones I can't. And the result was my dissertation, 350 pages on how we know Jesus was raised from the dead.
Cool. It's on. I'm going to use those verses then. So.
Well, that's what I was doing. And you know what? Nobody on my committee made me change a single sentence of my dissertation.
Wow. That's cool.
So they just said, well, they made little marks like,
sure.
You're using the wrong tense of this verb, or use a different noun, or those kind of things.
Yeah.
But they were very understanding of my critical argument. They didn't have much to say.
Yeah.
And when we got the oral defense, they were shooting theories at me. Well, why couldn't this have happened? Why couldn't that have happened? Why couldn't they be hallucinations? And I just came back with, I had almost 100 pages on hallucinations in my dissertation. And I would give my reasons, and they would go, all right, well, go ahead to the next guy. You go ahead, like that. And I'm thinking, wow, this is going pretty well. So
I know you're famous for this minimal facts.
That's what I started in my dissertation.
Yeah. Give us kind of the overview of how that works.
Sure. Well, what I did was I started with a list of facts. I think I started with about a dozen that everybody, all critical scholars are not. Nobody puts numbers on them, but probably 90% are going to give it to you. Almost nobody's going to complain if you use these facts.
Yeah, and so when we're talking critical scholars, we're talking about folks that do not believe that the Bible is God's word and that Jesus really resurrected from the dead. Is that correct?
Well, to say how far away it is from that, I often go to state universities and I'll hold up my Bible and I'll say, hey, if this book is inspired, Is Jesus raised from the dead? I'm not asking you if it's inspired. I'm just saying, if it is, would he be raised? And the students will go, well, yeah, if he's raised from the dead. I go, that's good, that's good. Now, if it's a reliable text, not inspired, but it's pretty good history, is Jesus raised from the dead? And they'll say, well, this is a pretty smart comment. They'll say, it depends on what parts of it are reliable and what parts are not. Okay, that's good. I said, that's good. The secular university. And then I'll say, now, what if the Bible is not inspired and not reliable? What if it is generally untrustworthy? And they'd go, no resurrection there. And I said, okay, here's my theme tonight. Here's the minimal facts argument. I'll say, if the Bible is not inspired and not reliable, I'm going to argue that Jesus was still raised from the dead.
Yeah.
And I said, if you disagree with me, you've got a job to do. Either during the Q&A or when it's over, come on down here and talk to me and tell me where I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Tell me where my argument is wrong. And that starts us going. So I will use facts. Now, later, I still use that list of about 12 or 15 facts. But what I do is I've shrunk it down to a list of really powerful 6. Okay. 6 of the 12 or 15. And those 6, I'll get almost no kickback. Now, of course, a critic's going to say, well, yeah, I'm going to give him the facts, but it all depends on what his interpretation of the facts is. Okay, that's cool. But I'm going to use facts, and I got a feeling you're not going to be able to pull off a view other than resurrection from these facts. That's my argument. My argument is that these 12 facts in general, but especially the 6 minimal facts, which I call the minimal facts argument, you're right, but I sometimes call it the lowest common denominator argument. Okay. Because I have this kernel, and you get a resurrection from it. Yeah. And that kernel can disprove the naturalistic theories. This kernel is the best, they provide the best reasons for resurrection. You go, well, how can it do all that? There's only 6 of them. Well, it's true. But how many facts back up those 6? Why do the critics allow those 6 to be true? I mean, in almost any field, engineering, medicine, you can say, well, I've got this pill, or I've got this scientific equation that gets me here. It's not just one equation, though. There might be a half dozen equations that say that equation is true. So that's what it's like with these 6 facts. In fact, with the 6 facts, there are over 100 reasons to believe the 6 facts. That's how much evidence there is. And you go, well, of course you say that. You teach at Liberty, or you went to a German Baptist church. I'd say, no. I got through my state university dissertation with this, so they couldn't have been that bad. It couldn't have been. That's what they told me right from the beginning. Remember, they said, don't tell us this happened because the Bible said it happened. So I couldn't give that reason.
So give me those 6 facts. Make your case.
All right. I'll tell you what. I'll give you the 6 facts.
Okay.
Number 1, Jesus died by crucifixion.
Okay.
Now you might stop and go, well, I know this guy who doesn't believe in the doesn't believe in the crucifixion. I'd say, I'll tell you what. Before you even tell me who it is, I'll bet you he's not a scholar, or at least if he is, he's not a specialist. He's not a specialist on this issue. He doesn't have a PhD in New Testament or theology or religion or something. Because of the scholars, you're going to have to look hard to find somebody who hasn't been raised from the dead. You go, what about Muslim scholars? Like I said, you have to be a specialist in I don't care if you're an atheist. In fact, please be an atheist. I can get along really well with atheists because they just concede this material as a general rule. But I'm saying you have to know what you're talking about. So you can't be the guy that lives with his parents in the basement who gets really angry when you try to say Jesus lived. That's not who we're talking about. And some of these guys, because it really happens, some of these guys, well, I'm a scholar. I've been studying this for years. According to you, you're a scholar. The scholars don't call you a scholar. So if you're a specialist, you go, well, Muslims don't believe that. Well, look, I'm not going to tell the Muslims what to believe about Islam, and they should tell me what to believe about the New Testament, right? You got to be a scholar in your own field. So, and no one questions crucifixion as a general rule. Okay, number 2, and I'm watching my words really carefully. Jesus' disciples had experiences that they believed were appearances of the risen Jesus.
Okay.
Here's a quick way to say it. They thought they saw the risen Jesus. The disciples thought, and you know, Bart Ehrman, the famous skeptic, atheist New Testament scholar, is going to say, the fact that the disciples thought they believed is a fact of history. He said, I won't argue with it. It's absolutely true. They thought they did. But why did they? Well, that is the question. But they really believed it. Yeah. Thirdly, this was taught very, very early. We can trace the initial proclamation of the resurrection. Bart Ehrman, not me. This is Bart Ehrman's words. We can trace the initial proclamation of the resurrection to 1 to 2 years after the cross. Wow. Not plus 40 when Mark was written, not plus 20 when Paul's first epistle was written, 1 to 2 years after the cross. And you go, that's absolutely crazy. And I'd say, go tell Bart Ehrman that, okay?
Yeah.
Go tell Bart Ehrman he's crazy.
Yeah.
Then, fourthly, the disciples turned the world upside down. I don't have to prove they died for their faith, but many of them died. The best arguments we have for the martyrdom of the apostles come from Peter, Paul, and James, the brother of Jesus, the big three.
Yeah.
And we have early first century evidence for their martyrdom. But that's not the point. I'm going to make the point not that they were all martyred for their faith, but they were willing to be martyred. You go, well, how do you know what's in their mind? I'm not reading their mind. Well, what are you? I'm reading their actions. They kept putting themselves in situations where they were threatened, they were hurt, they were wounded, their friends died. They kept it right up. That's putting yourself in the line of fire. And now to come back to that is, well, come on. Muslim missionaries died for their faith. Christians died for their faith. Jews probably died for their faith. For crying out loud, Buddhist priests set themselves on fire to protest war in Vietnam. Well, here's the key. Anybody will die for anything that is so important to them that making a statement and not giving up the belief is worth dying for.
Exactly.
And I don't doubt that atheist communists gave up their lives willingly in the communist revolution. Usually the things we'll die for are religious or political.
Yeah.
Usually. But here's the difference. Christians who die in the mission field today. Let's use a Muslim example. Muslims who die in the mission field believe Muhammad to be the prophet of Allah.
Yeah.
They don't know firsthand if Muhammad was. I'm not making fun of their belief. I'm just saying they believe others who taught that Muhammad was the prophet. They believe somebody else's belief. Same with Christians, okay? Same thing. Christians believe what the New Testament said. Christians believe what their pastor said. Here's the difference. Those three guys who were martyred, Peter, James, and Paul, they died for their belief. You led the program off with it. They died for their belief that they saw the risen Jesus.
Yeah.
See, I die for my pastor's belief, or I die for Augustine's belief or for Peter's belief, but they died for their belief that they saw the risen Jesus. You go, well, they could have been wrong. Yes, they could have been, but they died for their sight, for what they saw, which is a much better argument. And then my last two individuals, two skeptics, James, the brother of Jesus, and Paul, the persecutor, two of the three that we already used, two of the three became believers because they thought they saw the risen Jesus. Yeah. Those are my steps. And usually I get no pushback from critics. They'll just say, but it's your interpretation of it that I disagree with. And I agree with them. It's all about interpretation.
Sure.
But when we get into it, I want you to tell me what's wrong with my interpretation.
Yeah.
Once you grant those 6 facts, I want to know where you're going to get off the bus.
So just recap for me the 6 facts. Number 1 is what?
Crucifixion.
Okay. Number 2?
Disciples thought they saw the risen Jesus. They believed it.
3?
They proclaimed it very early, 1 to 2 years after the cross, according to virtually all skeptics today.
Gotcha. 4?
They were so serious about it that it transformed their lives.
Mm-hmm.
They did nothing else for the rest of their lives, as far as we know.
Yeah.
As far as nobody recanted. It totally changed them to the point where they were willing to die.
Gotcha. 5.
5 and 6 are the two skeptics. James,
Okay.
the brother of Jesus, who grew up in the house with them
Gotcha.
and didn't believe in him. And
Yeah.
Paul, who thought he was doing God a favor. I mean, I think of Paul having like a PhD in Old Testament.
Yeah.
And he was very sharp, and he was going to put shoe leather to it because he believed that he was doing God a favor to imprison or kill, stone Stephen. He watched them stone Stephen. Paul thought he was doing God a favor. Now, what is enough to convince James and Paul? So that's 5 and 6.
Okay, gotcha. So, those are the minimal facts that you use, or at least the 6 main points. So,
Right.
so now help me, drive the point home why you're so certain that speaks to Jesus rising from the dead. What makes you certain about that? I love Dr. Habermas's minimal facts argument. And we're going to be looking at some of the alternative explanations that people have to Christ's resurrection in part 2. And so make sure that you catch that program coming up here on 5 Good Reasons Why God Exists. I'm Kerry Decker. We'll see you next time.